generally, what do these executive orders mean? And I think a lot of people understandably, but mistakenly believe that they now have no employment law rights because, he's rolled back, these DEI initiatives and things like that. And just to be clear, as you said, federal anti-discrimination law is still alive and well, both in the federal sector and private sector. It would take an act of Congress to roll that back, and I don't expect that to happen. Welcome to this video cast by the Spiggle Law Firm. Hi, I'm Tom Spiggle, the founder of the firm. Today, we are going to be talking about the ongoing crisis in the federal sector employment area, in particular, these mass firings or imminent mass firings of DOJ prosecutors and folks in the FBI, particularly those that were involved in investigations of Donald Trump and his prior administration. So, and joining me today is one of our top-notch attorneys, Mike Ludwig, who has done a fair amount of work, a lot of work in the federal sector side. So I wanted to pick your brain, Mike, on what folks should be thinking about. So I will turn it over to you and just say, okay, so I'm a DOJ prosecutor. I think this is coming down the pike. What are my options? What are my protections? What would you recommend?
Yeah, and thanks for the introduction, Tom, and thanks for the question. So what I would say is that protections are still in place for federal employees. I know there's been a bit of discussion about, what rights you have as a federal employee. Are the rights that existed, before January 20th still in existence today? And the answer is that they are. So if you are a federal employee, specifically within the DOJ or the FBI, who is fearing, essentially termination as part of retaliation for the, involvement in previous investigations with the previous administration, those options are still available to you. And the two largest ones we can discuss are your own agency's Equal Employment Opportunity Office, the EEO, and the MSPB, the Merit Systems Protection Board, which is a separate entity that is available to all federal employees regarding terminations and essentially the civil service protections that they have. So the first option, the EEO within, that would be within the DOJ, for example, their own internal Equal Employment Opportunity Office. That is where complaints of discrimination can be filed, such as complaints that you've been terminated, where you're being discriminated or possibly terminated for your protected classes, such as race, sex, religion, disability,
national origin,
national origin, color, and then also for retaliation if you have previously complained about discrimination and then you feel like actions taken against you were retaliatory for that projected activity of complaining. That's where the EEO can come in, and so that is an option. And that is a internal kind of office within the Department of Justice. But I would say here, the more apt avenue would be the Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB, which is a separate entity. It's not associated with the DOJ. The MSPB is its own separate federal entity. I believe it was established under the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, and it deals with employment across the federal government in which employees believe they've been wrongly terminated, or they believe their termination was without merit, or was essentially unlawful or just inappropriate. And so there are multiple ways to go with the Merit Systems Protection Board. You can either print and complete MSPB appeal form and then submit it to the clerk of the board via mail, fax, or in person. But the more likely option is to go to the MSPB's website, and you can file an appeal electronically. And that is the process to do that. That will be the process to begin filing against, what you believe to be a improper termination. And you can submit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but I believe the deadline would be 30 days within the appeal, within the actual adverse action date. So within 30 days of the date that you were terminated, you would need to file that appeal with the MSPB, and that will start that process. And I know that the MSPB is something that is, it's a free service and it's available to anyone, any federal employee. And so you don't have to go through it with an attorney, but it is a very specific kind of fact intensive and, can be law intensive operations. We would, highly recommend having an attorney, a skilled employment attorney to represent you during that process, because it's not quite litigation. You're not filing a case in federal court or in, state court. It's not a case where you're going to be before a, federal judge. This is a case you'll be before an MSPB and an administrative judge there. But it does still have the same elements where you go through collecting of discovery, where both parties will exchange documents related to, the case, And then the agency will have an opportunity to file a motion to essentially get the case dismissed before the full hearing. So it isn't as long and, laborious as a full litigation case, but it is still, I believe the MSPB, their goal is to complete these appeals within 180 days. So about like 6 months or so. And so I know that that's kind of the goal. And during that 180 days period, it's kind of like a more truncated version of of litigation, but it does follow that same track. So there's value in getting an attorney for that case, because you can proceed with it on your own, but an attorney there can be very helpful, especially one who's gone before the MSPB before, knows how the process works, knows kind of what legal points and factual points to hit during that time. I didn't know if you had anything else to add, Tom.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great stuff. I think I would just add that for the a couple of things. There's been a lot of confusion, not just about FBI and DOJ employees, but about federal sector folks. Generally, what do these executive orders mean? And I think a lot of people understandably, but mistakenly believe that they now have no employment law rights because, he's rolled back, these DEI initiatives and things like that. And just to be clear, as you said, federal anti-discrimination law is still alive and well, both in the federal sector and private sector. It would take an act of Congress to roll that back. And I don't expect that to happen. Knock on wood. I think that'd be a real tough thing for them to do. But in any event, there are no efforts to do that now. So all these protections still apply. And I think your point about the EEO is a good one. I think the statute of limitations is 45 days there. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. For federal workers to file the EEO, 45 days after the most recent incident of discrimination.
Right. So you don't want to sleep on that too long because, you've got those limited windows, which is a little bit different than the private sector where you've got tend to have longer statute of limitations. It's also worth noting that if you go to your EEO office and you think you've been mistreated on the basis of, a protected class, like you talk about, that does also give you a bit of anti-retaliation protection. So if you haven't yet complained about this issue and you go to the EEO, then it would be illegal then for your employer to take action against you because you filed. Now, of course, it has to be legitimate. It has to be a good faith belief that you've been mistreated, in a protected class. You can't just make this up out of whole cloth. Not that I think people would do that. But as long as you've got a good faith belief, you could lose the underlying discrimination case and still win the retaliation action.
Right.
So it's a good tactical move to make if you think you have been mistreated. For instance, if you're the only or one of the few females in your department and, you've gotten let go or sidelined in favor of a male, somebody who replaces you who's a male, you could have a sex-based discrimination argument, and it's still the law about, folks with LGBTQ status, like the sexual identity is still, right? The Supreme Court has said that is protected by Title VII. There's been a lot of noise from the administration about that. So these folks still have rights. So don't feel like you have been stripped of all your rights just because you were in that group. And absolutely, these forums are made to be accessed without an attorney. I think I would not wait. Like if you are even thinking about getting an attorney, to get that ball rolling, particularly if you're within that 30 or 45 day window. But it is complicated and it's a sort of a Byzantine, both of them are sort of a Byzantine sort of system. The laws are very, the underlying laws are similar, but the procedural status of those are very weird sometimes and counterintuitive. So you really it does help to get somebody to shepherd you through it and somebody who knows federal sector employment. There are a lot of people who do employment law who don't do a lot of federal sector. For instance, I've done a lot of private, employment law work, not a ton of federal sector. So Mike, you would be the person to talk to about that. We've got a number of people in our office who do this sort of work, but understand also people who do federal sector work, they operate nationwide. So you can find somebody in California, you should find somebody in Oregon. They don't have to be in your jurisdiction. Because of the DC area, there tend to be a lot of folks here who do it. And there are a lot of good attorneys who do federal sector work. So I think folks who are facing this at the very least should go talk to somebody. We have fairly low cost consults that we offer people, for a half hour for $150. So I think that's money well spent just to get you pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, no, and the only thing I would kind of emphasize or add to that again would be the fact that, there's a lot of kind of noise going on, and some of that, as you said, may be targeted even at certain protected groups like LGBTQ plus employees, but the Supreme Court ruling on that is still in effect. The laws passed by Congress, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, are still in effect. So there may be some conflicting things you hear about what protections do or do not exist. But here, they still do exist. So we would advise you to proceed, if you believe you're being discriminated against, to still file with your agency's EEO office, or if you are let go as a process of this, you can still file with the MSPB. That is still a protections available to you. Nothing has changed in that regard. And I know that's there's a lot of kind of moving parts in there, because I know there's already some litigation being filed regarding some of these actions. So will be a bit of time before some of the full kind of outlook and effect is clear. But as of now, those protections are still in place. So that's not something that has been removed or, affected.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned Bostock, which is the Supreme Court case, which is, like I said, still in effect, that said Title VII affects sex identity or gender identity kind of claims, which tend to fall, from protections and folks in the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's also worth noting that federal sector workers, unlike private sector workers, do have a due process right to your job, and that's where the MSPB comes in. So, you have more protections than somebody in the private sector who generally they do not have due process rights. They have rights for not to be discriminated against and those sorts of factors, but they don't have this. So if your private sector friend, is going through something different, that's because there's a different track for folks in the private sector. Yeah, and you raise a good point. A lot of this is being driven by was it DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, or whatever, Elon Musk is doing. Yeah. There are pending, I believe 4 pending lawsuits against DOGE. I'll be curious to see. I don't know. Be curious to see if any of them file a TRO or temporary restraining order to kind of put this to a halt. But for right now, Elon's sort of running amok, and he hasn't been stopped. So I wouldn't wait on those. I'll also say there was another article in the New York Times this morning. It's the State Democracy Defenders Fund. So again, State Democracy Defenders Fund. It's a nonpartisan group that helps protect the right of federal employees. They're doing a lot of work with these FBI and DOJ folks, and they're working with a very well-known public sector whistleblower attorney named Mark Zaid. And so that may be something, for folks to, I don't know how wide their reach is. Like I said, I do know they're working with some of the FBI and the DOJ folks. So that would be a good one to join, because there's strength in numbers. But if for whatever reason, you can't get to that, or you're not covered by that, don't wait to go to the EEO. Don't wait to go to the MSPB. There's not a whole lot of downside to that. I mean, the worst that happens is that you lose, and you might get yourself some extra protection. Any other thoughts on that, Mike?
No, beyond that, recommendation being what I would do is just kind of file this, because it's better to file it. And then, the worst thing is that it doesn't work out and to not file it and feel like you could have, and the protections are still in place. And I think there's a bit of kind of almost a psychological part of it in which, they're trying to basically say, well, they're trying to make employees think that these protections don't exist, that these have been, affected by the recent changes, but that's not the case. These protections are still in place as they were on January 19th. They're still available, and we still, recommend moving forward with those.
Very good. Well, if you want anything else, we will call this a day on that topic, Mike. Appreciate folks joining. You can always go to our website, spigglelaw.com, if you want some more information about this. We also have a free online community. Let me make sure I get the URL right. It is spigglelaw.com/community. So spigglelaw.com/community. Again, it's no cost to join. We will have attorneys in these groups. Generally can't give legal advice, but can give some general information. But you can always exchange other information for folks who may be going through the same thing. So check that out. We also have a number of free videos in there for folks about issues related to employment law. So some good resources for everyone. In the meantime, thanks again, Mike, and best of luck to you guys out there going through this.